Okay, welcome to join today's Velero community meeting. Uh, so for the first, let me update some overall status. For V1.13, we have released the GA on January 10th. So you can visit or check the release notes from here. And for V1.14, we are still collecting the requirement, but we have also started the review of the candidates. We have some first round discussion of the issues, and it will be continued for another several rounds. And so, okay, this is about the V1.14 timeline. So anyone want to add some comments on this? I think, okay, this may be added by Daniel. Let me check with Daniel later. Okay, so another thing is Benny team will be on holiday from 10th February and come back from on 17th. That is for the overall status.
Yeah, so regarding regarding the holiday, so at that time there is a community meeting in Beijing time zone, so probably we have to cancel that occurrence.
Yeah. Okay.
Do we need audience help to do that, or Jolly?
But I think from technically it may be unable to cancel it in the Canada because those invitation was sent out by Vimeo email. So currently, I think only also do not have permission to send out email to cancel this candidate through Vimeo email. So
okay. Daniel, is this added by you or?
Yeah, I did. I just updated the wiki page to add the proposed time or date for each milestone, as we discussed. I also notified Shubham, Scott, Wes on the Velero Dev channel. So I don't hear any disagreements, so I updated to this wiki. If you click the link, we can quickly review it. Yeah, so generally we're gonna GA around the end of May and FC in the mid or the mid of April. Yeah, this is just tentative timeline, and if needed, we're gonna delay it. But I think we are relatively optimistic that this year we're gonna have 3 minor releases of Velero because we've already GA'd 1.13 in January. So we're gonna adjust it as needed in 1.14.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. Anyway, we can continue to discuss the timeline and the candidates in the following meetings for 1.14. Yeah. Now some individual update. Myself is are working on the discussions and the investigation for 1.14 candidate issues. And Daniel, please.
Yeah, I'm fixing an issue to support explicit credential when RSA is configured on EKS. And currently I'm working with Danfeng to verify my fix. Hopefully it will be fixed very soon. I've also talked to the guy who pinged me on Slack. I think his name is Rob, to verify my fix. Currently the fix works perfectly in his environment, but there's an issue in our pipeline. So yeah, we are focusing on that. In addition to that, I'm also triaging 1.14 candidates, and hopefully we can have a very rough plan before we leave for Chinese New Year. I also if there's anything the Red Hat folks or other maintainers wanna add 1.14, please feel free to add the 1.14 label, and we can triage them together.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thanks. And Xin, please.
I also work on triaging the 1.14 candidates, and I'm working on the issue 71 and 71, 49. That's all.
Okay, thanks. And Wenkai.
Yeah, I'm working on item to upgrade the version of Go plugin related libraries and tools. Currently, the version of this library tools are pretty old, so we want to upgrade them. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. And Tanfeng, please.
Yeah. I added I update the CI and end-to-end test to cover IRSA scenario. And currently, the data more pipeline failed with an issue. Daniel is working on that. I had run this pipeline again, and the results still not in yet. And thanks Tiger for review the in test PR for me. Thanks. And that's all from my side.
Okay, thanks. And Chumi.
Yeah, I'm doing the repository maintenance design for it. Is sometimes will consume a lot of memory. Instead we do the maintenance in the Velero server pod. We launch an independent job to do it. Second, I'm doing the fixing default BCF setting related bug.
Okay, this is the issue, right?
Yeah, the design is
Oh, yeah.
still draft. I will submit later.
Okay. Okay, then when there will be a design, when the design is submitted, we can have everyone review on that. And basically we will move the repository maintenance to a dedicated job, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And Shubham, please.
Yeah, I've added 2 draft PRs for 2 bugs that I created last week. I received some feedback on the CSI plugin one, and the other one is just a warning sort of validation. And I think I received some feedback from Daniel also today, so need to work on addressing that regarding volume policies extension design.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So as for the 2 PRs about the bugs, do we want to discuss them? I recall we
Yeah,
reviewed them, right?
I just got the review on the CSI plugin one from Shun today, so I need to update that PR, but didn't get anything on the warning one.
Yeah, and by the way, as for the enhancement in volume policy, I think that one we're gonna put in 1.14 milestone. So we really gonna accelerate that to merge the design and implement it in 1.14. I think that's one like an anchor feature in 1.14. We really want to get end-to-end work in
Yeah.
1.14 timeline. Yeah, if you need any help, feel free to reach out to Yonghui or me. So we can accelerate it. In terms of review, design, including implementation, we can work on that together to make things work.
Definitely. Thanks, Daniel.
Okay, yeah. So later we may have some time to discuss this for the short conclusion.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. And Tiger, please.
Hi. So I wrote some plans for the replicated local volume provider plugin. That's the first bullet point. To help break up the tasks that we need to do and get some alignment with the replicated people, and maybe if everyone agrees, we can start making issues. And then I also put up some draft design for the API server for the Velero download client, Velero download server. And that's still very much in draft. So if you have any feedback, let me know. And then lastly, I have a PR up for end-to-end test updates. I'll have to rebase that against the URSA end-to-end tests. But it added more coverage. So if you have any comments there as well, so please leave a review. And that's it from me.
Yeah. So one quick question regarding the download API server design. I believe that's also part of the NFS or a local storage support, right? So since you are working on the end-to-end flow to support the local storage as BSL, right, Tiger?
Yeah. So I can do that as well. But this is
no,
just
I'm not asking you to do that, but I'm just want to clarify if there's any strong expectation from Red Hat or you, like in 1.14, like what progress do you think we want to make? Because when we are discussing internally, that one we don't see it but as a very top priority. So I just want to clarify.
Yeah, so if I understand correctly, from the Red Hat side, we want to just get the design in so everyone's have an agreement. So it's not going to be 1.14, but just get the design in.
Yeah, I think the idea being we'd like to get the design approved and merged in 1.14. That way, when the 1.15 cycle begins, we already have an approved design we can start immediately on.
So do we have expectation to make things work end to end in 1.14 in terms of local storage support, or that's also a wishful goal we can stretch in different releases to make things work?
I don't think we want to add like everything supported at the moment.
I see. Okay.
For 1.14, but if we can add some tests that works right now, whatever is working in the local volume provider, like for Restic, right? That already works as is. If we can add tests for that and it doesn't slow or prevent 1.14 from going, we could. I think it doesn't hurt to add end-to-end tests there.
So Tiger, is the intention that once this the other thing you're working on around the download server, that once that's implemented, we'd want the replicated local provider to actually be refactored to use that instead of doing their own file serving?
I believe so. Yeah, I think we are.
So
yeah, so we want to refactor to the download server.
Yeah. So the idea is initially we pull this in and people can start using it as is, where they're running their own download server. But we want to pull that into Velero so that Velero is maintaining this download server, because we also have other use cases around disconnected S3 buckets and all that, or network issues rather. So eventually this plugin then becomes a pure plugin and it doesn't have to kind of implement its own download server as part of the plugin.
Okay.
Yeah, so I believe the concern right now with that plugin is it has its own server, and so from my standpoint, I think it's okay to add tests, but we don't say we support it yet. Just so we don't break any local volume provider users that are using it. Just unofficially do some testing.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work, discussion, and tests that need to be written before the ghost of support, using the term support, comes into play here.
Okay.
Yeah. one quick question from me is, since we have the download API server as part of the local volume support or NFS support, but you know that I want to know the scope. We know that even for the object store, we still need the download server in some scenarios. So for the scope, since we are having we are building the Velero building download server, will we cover all the scenarios like the object store, NFS, and local volumes?
I think it should be pluggable. So any object store, any storage plugin should be able to use this API server to serve the manifests and whatever else you need to request.
Yeah, so it means, it means download server will be able to talk to all the backup storage types, including the object store, NFS, and local volumes, right?
Yeah, that's the plan.
And Tiger, I guess this also might require then a V2 of the object store plugin to be able to deal with the APIs related to the download server, or do you think the existing APIs are sufficient for what we need there?
I have to check on that. I'm not sure yet.
Okay, but I mean, we have the ability to iterate on plugin versions. So if we do need to make a change that's not backwards compatible or whatever, if we need new functions to be added to that API, we have the ability to make a V2 if we need it. Because you were just saying if you're going to be pluggable, so that the different object store plugins know how to download their data. That sounds like we probably need a new function to that interface in a V2 to handle that. But like I said, we're not that far along the design yet.
I think sorry, at the high level, I think we can reuse the download request object. So right now, when you do a download request, you get a URL to the object storage in the status. So instead of URL to say Amazon S3, it could be a URL to the ingress that Velero is serving. And then Velero can route the request to S3 and then return the object, right?
Yeah. Wenkai, maybe you want to check this design because I know you have some idea regarding how to extend the API server of Kubernetes to support the downloading. So
yeah, sure.
Yes, and so the download server will listen the URL request from the client, and so in order to work with all the backup storage types, maybe we need to build an interface to cover all the different backup storage types, and the download server. From the server side, the download server talks to this interface only, and the interface will be able to support various backup storage types. That may be a possible solution, but we can check the details later.
Right, and then that's kind of what I was referring to, saying we might need to extend that object store plugin API to add new functions to handle these these things, if that's the way we end up going with that.
Yeah, I don't think that's a very high priority because we are working fine with all the cloud providers object store. Yeah, I know that the issue when there's internal menu. But I think, like Scott said, let's
as I understand it, there's two main issues that kind of are driving this download server. One is when the client can't access the object store, whether it's Minio or whatever, and the other case is again this replicated plugin where if we have the internal download server, then the plugin doesn't have to implement its own download server, which it's doing right now. If we don't need that kind of Minio use case sooner, maybe that replicated plugin with its own implemented server is good enough for initial use, and then again that may not affect. I guess it depends also on when we start testing with this and with people using this, is the internal download server that's part of the plugin stable enough, or is this something where it's we end up in a situation where we'll be better off pulling that into Velero?
Yeah.
Either way, I think it's good to go ahead and work on the design, but like you said, the priority may maybe lower on this than some things. At this point, that might change depending on where the replicated provider, how important that becomes, how important NFS is, and whether we have a problem with the implementation where it's part of the plugin instead of part of Velero for that download server.
Sure. And Tiger, just want to clarify, because when we are triaging the 1.14 candidate, there are a few issues assigned to you, and we think maybe it's good time to put them into 1.14 milestone. So just want to make sure you also have timeline to, you also have bandwidth to handle the issues in 1.14, in parallel with this download server design.
Yeah, I have two issues in 1.14 candidate, and I think one of them is should be pretty simple, the RESTIC repository one. And then the existing resource restore policy, that one, depending on how many feedback I get, I guess that's less predictable as to if it gets in. But
okay. Yeah, I think the existing existing resource policy that one, I think we need to somehow drive it to close in 1.14. Somehow we also either fix them or think that's put them in the backlog and maybe triage later, because there's a PR open for one release. We really want to make it close somehow in 1.14 timeline. So you think you also have some time to work on that, right? In 1.14.
Yeah, I think we can, if we can scope the feature very small, it's not going to support every edge case, then I think I can probably do it for 1.14.
Yeah. Okay. I'll double check the PRM.
Yep, and I still need to do the design first. Maybe we can get the design in first too. And yeah, that's it from me.
Yeah, okay, thanks. And Shichi, please.
I wrote the design for adding the finalization phase to the restore workflow, and this PR is still under review, so please take a look if you are interested in it, and feel free to.
You need to update the URL, Yonghui. There's a
what's wrong with the URL? Okay, got that. Yeah.
Yeah, this one is still under review, and for Scott, would you like to take a look? Just want to make sure it look good to you.
Yeah, I was actually just looking at that a few minutes ago. I think the main thing I was noticing is I think it would be good to include in the design, the specific use cases that we're adding it for, just so that it's clear, why we need this.
I refer to a issue and hand that need to be implemented in this phase.
Okay, I got it. So yeah, you did mention the one there. I mean, I guess it might be good to, in the design, to kind of show where that fits in, like what and how we'd actually do that here in terms of, okay, this is the task, and how do we do that in terms of the context that we created. It wasn't really obvious, if I'm as a developer, I need to add another task here, another thing that gets done. How do I do that? If the design could kind of incorporate those steps for that particular issue, because that's the initial implementation is going to just have that one. What are we adding to that context to know what needs to be done to implement that? Just because it's a little abstract. It was a little hard for me to say, oh, hey, here's what we're going to be doing in this phase. Because like on the backup, for example, what we do in the backup finalized phase is very explicit. It's part of the, it's just, okay, we take all the items that we expect updates for, we call in a backup item those again, we add it to the backup. So it's a very specific workflow. That's not, this is more flexible, kind of more driven by things that have been added. And so it just was a little bit less clear to me. Okay, what are we adding here? How do we extend this? How does this fit into that issue?
Okay, got it. So can we leave the comments on this PR so we can
Yeah,
talk about
let
it.
me see. If you look at the bottom, I think I added a comment. I'm not sure if it's clear enough. Yeah, just get kind of how does a task to be done get plugged into this framework? Give an example of what you would do, what the code would look like. That might be helpful there.
Got it. Thanks.
And then and again, since we have an example already, an issue that says this is why we're doing this. This issue needs to be implemented to fix that. Maybe the examples can be geared towards that particular issue. Saying, okay, a little code block or something that'll kind of show how that gets invoked.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. That's for the individual update and status update. Now, the discussion topics. So this one is just the one for the volume policy extension. And we have a short discussion yesterday, and so I have write down some, the quick, something like principles. Not sure if they are all correct, but so we can discuss this and we can correct them. So here, I think we are on the same target that we want to make a simple way for user to specify the backup type for volume. And we also want to give a user a simple way to specify the backup type for all the volume if the per volume, the policy is not specified. And finally, we want we now have a default priority design so that when nothing is specified, we now can decide the backup type for every volume. That is yeah.
I know I talked to Shubham a bit about it. I would say all three of those things you mentioned here, because the volume policies framework already has a way of selecting volumes. You can do it by type, you can do it by size, you can do it by various characteristics. So that's built into the infrastructure that we use now for skipping volumes. And my understanding, talking to Shubham, is that we're basically using that same structure. So you might say, okay, for all CSI volumes, we want to use snapshot. And then after that, you might have, and the way you would get to the default was if you specify a volume policy that matches every volume, because the idea is when you hit the first match, you're done. You don't go further. So if you have one more specific rule, at first it says anything that's CSI is snapshot, followed by any volume that's left. So you just have basically an empty selection where it doesn't specify size or type or anything else. File system backup. Or if you flip that around, you would have a rule that says anything NFS or anything, maybe you had a rule that says I want volumes smaller than a certain size to use Copia for whatever reason. So you could have a volumes based on size, specify Copia, and then you had your general rule that says match all volumes it's going to say Copia, I mean file system backup, but match all volumes, snapshot. Shubham, is that consistent with the way we discussed that before?
Yeah, so basically if there is no criteria specified, then the volume won't be backed up with the current design. So I think in the given three goals in this discussion topics, first one is satisfied. For the second one, we don't have a default set of rules, but there must be some criteria matching all volumes at least. And for the third one as well, there is no goal in the design for the third one. Like we are not considering a global priority. Let's say basically it's like use legacy approach or use the newer approach.
Yeah, I don't know that you need the global priority because
Yeah.
the rules, the way the volume policies work themselves already have that built into the system, because you can define a rule that matches everything by just not specifying any features. And so you put that last, and that's your default.
Correct. Yonghui also have some concern regarding the global priority definition, because in addition to volume policy, we still have some implicit priority defined in the backup controls code. I don't think we want to change that. Yeah, by reading the comment in this PR, I mean, YouTube propose we want to reorganize the backup flow, but yeah, Shubang said it may be too risky. I kind of think also it's a bit risky. So it's probably not very possible to define this priority in volume policy because there is already a priority somehow defined in the code of Velero.
Yeah, and if we wanted to have a global priority sort of thing, I think that's like something we would need to involve CRD changes at least.
I'm not sure in this sense, in the existing workflow, that default is defined using the default to FS backup. It's either true or false. If it's true, then the default is FS backup, and if it's false, then it's snapshot. And so these volume policies are essentially changing the way we do that and specifying explicitly snapshot or file system backup. So because of that, it still seems like if you just make that last rule, the match all volumes, you say everything that we haven't said something about so far is going to be file system backup. And because the current code in the workflow chooses file system backup or snapshot based on the opt-in, opt-out rules.
Right.
Yeah, actually,
would replace that in those cases.
Yeah, actually, the purpose is very simple. Like we want this volume policy to as a new configuration.
Yeah.
New way of configuration besides the current lots of options scattering everywhere. So the purpose is like when you specify a volume policy configuration, either they specify a per volume way or specify some other things, or they don't specify anything. The users will not need to specify any other options, current option like default to FS, to default to snapshot or snapshot volume or snapshot data move. Don't need that, and they only to specify a very simple configuration. And the benefit is like when users from the first place, users will be users will be very easy to specify the backup type, and the currently lots of users don't understand when to use for specify backup type, when to use that. For example, when to use the FS backup, when to use the snapshot, right? And in some scenarios like the database backup, they are still using the FS backup, but FS backup is not consistent, right? So we want give user a very simple way to specify and the backup type they want for the volume they want to specify.
Right.
But finally, they will not need to worry about other ones, and they will not need to specify the existing option. I think that is some purpose.
Yeah, and that's part of the design too. I believe we set it up so that if you define any volume policies for either snapshot or FS backup, then we automatically exclude the previous way of doing this. So we're only looking at volume policies, and we say per volume decisions, but it's really more of a matching volume. So you have a rule that matches certain volumes based on characteristics of that volume, and that could match one volume or many volumes for each of those rules, just like for the skip rules.
Yeah, and basically,
are you are you saying that if users specify volume policy, we automatically ignore all other settings?
Well, no, not skip policy, because skip policy already exists and that doesn't affect this. So basically, what we don't want to have is users specifying, the legacy opt-in, opt-out, and also doing volume policies for FS backup or snapshot, because that gets very confusing. They either need to use the new way or the old way. So I think the design has validation around that to say you can't specify default to also FS backup and volume policies for snapshot and FS backup in the same backup, because you either need to use the old approach or the new approach, because otherwise you
yeah, but yeah, I understand the idea, but I think that may be difficult to implement because we only know if a user chooses to use opt-in, opt-out. We only know if he chooses to use that or not when we are in the progress of backup, because that's in the annotation of the pod. Without seeing that pod, we will never know if user has chosen to use that or not.
But what we know, because if the user is set default to FS backup is true or false, because I think part of the changes, so if you set it to false, you're saying opt. Is that opt out? Yeah. No. If set it to false is opt out, so that it's true is opt in. If you don't set it at all, because I think that this was being used as a Boolean pointer. But there's one other way of doing this, which is not in the design. I think we initially thought this would be too confusing, but it's worth mentioning. The other way of doing it is to say you go through the volume policy. Volume policies always take precedence, and if there is no matching volume policy, then we use the legacy behavior.
Yeah, I think that's probably a safer way, because you never. I think that the hard part is you cannot validate and fail early.
Currently, I have specified that if the volume policy exists, then the newer approach will be taken, else we'll continue with the annotation-based legacy approach. In the design.
And the proposed, and it sounds like the alternate proposal here is, instead of trying to validate and say you can't do this, is that basically if you have, we process volume policies first, and if the volume matches a volume policy, that's what we use. And if there is no volume policy specified, then we go back to opt-in, opt-out for any remaining volume. So for example, you could define a volume policy that says, I want my database server here to use data mover, use the snapshot rather, and don't specify any of the volume policies, and everything else will use the current rule, either defaulting to FS backup or to snapshots. So that is another way of doing this. I don't know how much that complicates the implementation. It just says, basically when you go through the list of rules, if there is no matching rule, because I think in the current design, Shivam, when we're saying we're ignoring the old stuff, if there's no matching rule, then we don't back the volume up at all. And instead of that, if there's no matching rule, we just follow the legacy behavior for that volume. That would work. That would be consistent. It might be more confusing. It might not. It sounds like we have disagreement here as to which sounds more confusing to each of us. But either way, we have to document this very clearly, because someone's going to get confused whatever we choose.
Right.
So we do this on a per volume basis, right? So currently, what I put up in the design, wherever there is a code flow for legacy approach, I'm also processing the FS backup, the corresponding volume policy approach at the same time. If volume policy exists, then we are giving precedence to process that for that particular volume.
I think that
I also heard something else mentioned that I think is not in our design. We may need to figure out whether it should be in the design. Because I think there's a mention of, saying this volume is going to just use CSI backup, or this other one's going to use data mover. Right now, data mover is either all or nothing. If any CSI volume is going to use data mover if we have snapshot move data set to be true. Is the intention to keep that behavior, or to incorporate, snapshot move data and CSI as separate actions, where in the same backup you can do snapshots for some?
I think there's flexibility in the data structure of volume policy to specify additional properties for a given action. So maybe the data movement can be a additional property for the action snapshot. That's what I'm thinking, but I need to double check.
Yeah.
Also, I don't think we need to cover that in this design, because that will
I was
make.
Going to say, if we ignore that and just specify snapshot versus FS backup as policies, because right now the assumption is if your policy is snapshot and snapshot move data is set to true, then every snapshot also gets used with data mover. I think changing that assumption, again, we risk being confusing to users, because they say, oh, I set a snapshot volume policy, but then I set snapshot move data to true, but now we're not using data movement because volume policy said snapshot. So again, we need to be careful about that.
Yeah.
And also, I guess we need to
Yeah.
decide whether that's a valid use case. Do we want to say in the same backup, we want to do CSI snapshots, but not data movement for some volumes, and CSI snapshots with data movement for others, or is that
Yeah.
just too confusing?
Yeah, I think in future that's doable, because when we are talking about default behavior is probably defined in the backup CR, and volume policy is most likely for the special behavior. We can also set the default behavior in volume policy. That's doable. But if user do not set anything, Velero fall back to the legacy way, which is in the backup
Also,
CR.
volume policy is just a string right now. So if you wanted to, it's almost like you'd need multiple additional, because right now we just say snapshot, and snapshot says follow snapshot move data. It's almost like if you wanted to implement this in the future, you would need to add 2 new volume policies. Because you had a snapshot volume policy which follows the snapshot move data field and uses the default, and then you could create snapshot with data movement as one volume policy, meaning always use data mover, and then a snapshot without data movement volume policy which says never use data mover, and then the plain snapshot would follow the default.
Yeah.
So again,
let me add something more about the default behavior. Actually, we want that this volume policy could work independently, or work as itself to cover all the volume backup type selection cases without the existing ones, or that in future gradually we will replace the existing ones getting everywhere for the individual options. So now we have in the current design we have the way to specify the backup type per volume, and we have the way to specify the backup type for many volumes, or like a star for all the volumes. But we don't have don't cover the case that if user don't not specify anything, neither per volume or neither for all the volumes, what is the default behavior? Right now, we can fall back to the existing behaviors, like to visiting the options default backup default a volume sample of sample volume. But in future, we want we want this new options or new configuration work separately or individually. We want to get rid of the existing options. That is something from my I propose. So I think if that is the right direction or the right idea, we will need maybe it's not a persistent structure design in the current volume policy configuration for the global priority definition, but something like code or something like in memory structure definition. So
I think we can actually use the current design for that. It sounds like, though, I guess 2 things that I'm hearing there. One is once we implement this volume policy, we may want to deprecate the default volume step as backup field and the annotations to say, okay, these are still supported now, but we expect to remove these in the future of Velero, so we want people to use volume policies instead. I think with volume policies, you already have the ability to set a default, because you just create a volume policy that matches all volumes, and then you set that to whatever you want that default to be. Make that your last rule.
In that way, users will need to create a volume policy for every backup, and they will need to
I see what you're saying. One possibility, and again, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves here. This is something that's not part of this design, but just an example of how you could do this. You could create a config map that defines the default volume policies, and you could apply that to every backup at the end after the backup specific volume policies are added.
Yeah, but
so something like that. Again, I think that this is a future feature. We can create an issue for it. I don't think it's part of the scope of Tubaum's design, but I think we could create some way of defining global defaults for volume policies that apply to all backups.
Yeah.
Whether it's a config map or something else, we can work through that. But I think that does make sense. It's something we could do.
Yeah, I think we have quite some options to do this. But one thing is like, if we do like that, we will need user to specify the backup types or backup priorities. Actually, I want to propose some idea like we give a default priority with our expertise. Like,
but
there's
but there's already a default priority here.
But
that's not depending on our expertise, and I think it's very difficult to leverage the expertise.
Right now,
sorry,
the default is...
sorry, but let me explain it to you, because if we go back to the example you mentioned, to database, how we handle database volume, it will be very difficult for Velero to tell whether the PV is for database or not. So it is really tricky in terms of how to leverage this expertise.
Yeah.
I think from Velero's side, we need to provide enough flexibility for the user. So that user can define it based on his expertise.
I think when that example, when I said database, I didn't mean Velero would determine a database. What I meant is the user would label it and use that label in their volume policy or something like that. As for default, yep, we have a default already. It's called, this is the default FS backup field flag. That's the current default. But we just talked about how we want to remove that and use volume policies to define that default. But if we don't do that, we already have a default field. Because the default volumes to FS backup flag provides that default policy. It's either going to be FS backup or it's going to be snapshot.
Yeah, actually, I think there is one way to visit some more options or annotation that is decided by applications, and the other and another way is like we give a very basic suggestions or advice like. We always take snapshot, or the snapshot. It's always with a higher priority than to the FS backup, and then because snapshot is always correct, right? And for another case like we always take CSS snapshot. That is what we currently always have. Right?
So we already have that unless you set the default to FS backup, and then we flip that default.
Sorry, Scott?
Yeah, well, whether we're defaulting to snapshots or not depends on that field, the flag, default volumes to FS backup. If that's set to true, then the default is FS backup, not snapshot. If it's false, then the default is snapshot. It's not FS backup.
Yeah, actually, from my side, I don't I don't think users need to specify the default to FS backup. Actually, we need to hard code that, or make that as the part of the default priority. Like default to FS backup is never true, because we already have the CSS snapshot and CSS snapshot data movement, and the CSS snapshot is very general and universal right now. So none of users would need the default to FS backup as a default option.
I think I understand you. Yeah, but Yonghui, I don't quite understand what you're proposing. I understand the background you mentioned, and it's true, but I don't quite understand what you're proposing. Why that relates to the volume policy.
Yeah, actually, actually, I don't think we can define something in the volume policy structure, but we need to have some kind of in-memory structure or some kind of code as a facility or work together with this volume policy. And finally, user will not need to specify anything, and they will be able to make a successful backup and
but then you are talking about breaking change, but I don't think this design is about any breaking change.
No, I think we're several releases ahead of ourselves here. I think in this design, if you want to make it a non-breaking change, your default is simply whatever the current default is. We already have that default to FS backup field. So if a volume does not match a volume policy, then we use that existing rule to determine. So basically, for any volume that's not matched by a rule in the volume policies, we're going to back it up the same way we currently back it up in Velero 113.
Yeah, in order not to make the breaking change, I think one later breaking change, like now user, if they want to use FS backup, they must specify the default to FS backup. Others will work with its own priority. Yeah. I'm not sure this works.
I mean, that's already true. You have to specify default FS backup to set it to true if you want that to be the default. If you don't specify that when you install Velero and you don't add it to the backup, then the default is going to be snapshots. So the only time we default to FS backup is either if the user specifies that when they create the backup, or they specify that when they install Velero as a global default.
Yes, this is true.
Would you guys want me to add a non-goal here that we won't have a default behavior implicitly embedded in volume policy?
But I think we can do that, right? I mean, given the framework, you just add a final
but
section.
The user will have to do it. We won't assume that. That's right.
Right. So Shubham, does that mean that if there's no default volume policy, like in other words, if there's no matching volume policy, we fall back to previous Velero behavior of using the opt-in or opt-out?
Yeah. So let's say, like, for example, you encounter a pod, let's say, for FS backup. In that case, for that pod, you check if the volumes accompanied with that pod have any volume policy of FS backup or snapshot. If that exists, then go with that flow, or else go with the annotation based approach. That's what I have put up in the design as well.
So basically, we consider all the policies, and if we find a match, we use that match. And if we don't find the match for the volume, then we go back to the old.
Only two kinds of match though.
Right. Well, no, because if we find a match for skip, then we skip it, and so we don't do it. So basically, if a volume policy matches, we know what we're doing with the volume.
Yeah.
If there's no matches, then we use the current selection behavior.
Basically, with volume policy, you get what you order for. That's the deal.
Yeah.
And so one result of this is that any backup you create that doesn't specify any volume policies or only specify skip policies will behave exactly the same with this implemented as it did in 113 and 112.
Yes.
Sounds like a good test.
Yeah.
And if you want to change things in the future for how defaults work, and you say, oh, we don't like default FS backup because we want to encourage people to use CSI, that's fine. For the future, we can deprecate things and change them in the future, but that's out of the scope of this proposal.
Yeah, and that could work, like, as you suggested, as an intersection of some other data structure and volume policies. The default priority data structure and volume policies.
Right. If we wanted to eventually get rid of completely this annotation-based opt-in, opt-out approach.
Yeah. So if everyone is in agreement, then I would ask to re-review against the goals in the design.
So Shubham, that is one change, I think, from the current version of the PR, right? Because we instead of saying we don't allow the new and the old to counteract, to coexist in a backup, instead we're saying that we're going to default to the old behavior when we don't find a matching policy. I think that's a change from the last version, at least that I looked at the PR.
No, we just decide based on the existence that.
Right, but I mean, at one point there was we had said we're going to if you set default volumes to FS backup, and you set policies, we would error out saying you can't do both, and now we're saying you can do both. So that's a change, right?
Yeah.
So okay. So we remove that validation, and instead we actually consider both. Instead of either A or B in terms of the two different approaches, we just apply volume policies first, and if there's no matches, then we apply the old policies. sorry, the old logic workflow.
Yep, I can add that.
Yonghui, so if you still have some disagreement, I think we can take the discussion offline and continue on the Slack channel.
Yeah,
thanks.
Slack or on the PR itself once the updates get made. But I would hold off for probably a little bit before commenting on the PR, because it sounds like we do need to update that based on today's discussion.
Yes, and I will think about this later offline. And I think we are very close. Our current conclusion are very close to what our users want. But I still think we just missing some things, like users from end to end or from the end user. They don't know which backup type is taken by Velero, or which backup type they should take. I don't. I think we may miss something, but later. Let me think about this later.
Yeah, that might be something we need to think about in terms of documentation too, in terms of scenarios where you would want to use this versus that, and how you would configure the volume policies to match that.
Yes, but
you will documentation enhancements.
Yes, you will make that in the documentation. We will have a long list to explain the different bug types and in which scenarios they user need to take for different applications, something like that.
I think the simplest one we want to propose to people is because right now there's no way to tell Velero, hey, I want you to always use CSI snapshots when you can, and when you can't do that, use FS backup. This will allow you to do that with one simple rule. And we need to document to users, put this one rule in and this works for you, because I think that's going to be a common scenario of, I want to use snapshots everywhere I can. And I only want to use FS backup when I'm using NFS or some other provider that doesn't have CSI snapshots.
Yeah, that sounds like some very high level configurations like the things in the SLA, right? And,
yeah, I mean, you can create a volume policy there, and one of the characteristics that you can select is, hey, this is CSI volume. I want snapshots.
So I have a question for you guys. Wouldn't it be easier if we don't mingle with the legacy approach and volume policy? Like, wouldn't the validation make it simpler for the users? Because there can be multiple combinations if they use the default flags what exist today and volume policies.
Do you mean don't fall back?
Yeah, don't fall back. I would just add a validation in the earlier phase of the backup itself.
But like I said, I don't think you can validate the opt-in, opt-out early, because that's in the pod annotation. We don't know that earlier.
We could add,
but you can look at the default flag. If they set that default flag to either true or false, then we know that they're using that, because if that becomes is a bit of a breaking change, because the current rule, the current workflow is, if you don't set that on the server, like if you don't set default volume step as backup, then on the backup itself it always gets set to false. So for the validation that Shubham is suggesting, we have to change that logic to actually keep it as nil, as an empty pointer, rather than setting it to true or false. I don't know if that's confusing to users or not. That would be again, I think either way it's going to be confusing. It's just you're going to be confusing a different subset of your users with one approach versus the other.
I'm not sure we are ready, because we will need to make volume policy very powerful, and there is probably an existing use case, because of volume policy, user may choose to use volume policy to skip one specific kind of volume, like the volume is too large.
We're excluding skip from this as this consideration. So the way Shubham has it in this current PR, if you're skipping but not using it for snapshot or FS backup, that exclusion wouldn't apply if we decided to take that approach. But
I think we can take that offline, but the first reaction from me is I don't think that's a very good idea to you know, make them mutually exclusive. I understand your point, but I think that will maybe confuse the user. Maybe he just wanna explicitly choose the action for one specific volume, but then and then fall back to backup CR. I still think that's a valid use case.
No, so in that case, they could always define a default volume policy, right?
Yeah, but if they were actively using opt-in or opt-out with annotations, that wouldn't work. In other words, if you say you had a current backup schedule and a current set of backups that for whatever reason you're using the legacy annotations for a bunch of your volumes, and you, with this new policy in place, you want to, I want to use a policy for some of my items. In Daniel's suggestion, as you could use those two together, with what you were suggesting, basically those annotations would be totally ignored.
Yeah. Wouldn't that also make users go towards volume policy, as we are like more interested, like?
Yeah, I guess it also depends on how actively we want to deprecate the old system. If we're interested in deprecating the old system relatively shortly after we implement this, then I think making them mutually exclusive makes it easier to deprecate it. If we make them work conveniently side by side, it's going to be a little harder to get people to stop using it.
And given that, and as well, I think the permutations of using volume policy with the existing legacy approach will confuse the users.
I mean, either way, it's not a breaking change, because any backup schedule that exists already doesn't have any policies defined for these new policies, and so it would support the legacy approach because that's the only approach that's being used. It would only be when they decided to add a new policy for using snapshots, for example, they'd have to convert their entire backup to using the new policies.
Yeah.
Although actually, yeah, Shubham, I just realized though, it might actually be a breaking change though, in the sense, if we're changing the behavior of making it possible for a backup to not have default volume status backup either true or false, that would be a breaking change for users that are only using that flag from the server install.
No, but in that case, they will have to specify volume policy as well, right?
Well, right. Well, that's what I'm saying. They'd have to specify volume policy. So for example, if you don't set default volumes to FS backup true on the server, that means it's not being set there, which means it's in the current code defaulting to false. And to do the validation you're talking about, we need to stop defaulting to false if it's not set explicitly. But that could break users. So I think is a potential risk there. Not sure what the right. Another approach here would be to basically, instead of airing out if you try to use both of them, is basically documenting that if you use the new policies, we ignore the old stuff and add a backup. I don't know. But again, that's going to confuse some users as well. But at least that won't break anyone that's not using volume policies. That would be the least breaking change that still prevents the two to coexist. But again, it could be confusing.
I mean, having a bit of a representation of the various possible paths might help inform the discussion to the point of conclusion. I thought we were with volume policy with a fallback and then an eventual default set by the user at install time, right?
That's one. Yeah, I mean, that's one that we were talking about. And then Shubham was suggesting we didn't want that. We wanted to just not.
I know.
Try to use the default. So
Shubham. Shh.
So, but I think both are valid approaches. The question is which users get confused by one and which ones get annoyed. I think the one thing that we have to be sure doesn't change is any backup that doesn't use these new policies and when you create it needs to be unchanged in the way it works, which I think leaves us really two main ways of doing this. One option we ignore the old policy. So we ignore the opt-in, opt-out completely if you specify policies. And so that might cause users to not realize that things aren't being backed up the way they expect. The other approach is to fall back, which might be a little more complicated to implement. Although I'm not sure how much.
I'm not sure if the second option is more difficult to implement because
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I'm saying it might be. I haven't looked at this directly. So it's it will be harder to maintain because we're having both paths, you know, and might result in more obscure bugs saying, hey, why didn't this get backed up this way? I think either way, it does sound like we really do want to deprecate the old approach as soon as we can.
We need a deprecation policy first.
Whatever we're doing here is a temporary thing, and eventually we can remove it entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah, in that way, when we write the code, we will be very clear for the code which one is a long-running thing or which one is a deprecation thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we're proposing deprecating it at the same time we implement the new thing. I think the first release 1.14 that includes this, we don't deprecate anything yet. We kind of want to see how well this works and all that. But I would suggest that in 1.15, for example, we would want to deprecate this, the old approach, which that, you know, because the earlier we deprecate it, the sooner we have the option of removing it, even if we decide not necessarily at a given time to do so.
So one question from me is like, when users create this volume policy, and this volume policy will override or overtake all the existing policies. All the existing policies will be ignored. Does that mean a break change?
What do you mean by existing policy?
I don't think it's a breaking change because the user is adding new things to a backup. A breaking change would be if the same backup schedule from before stops working. But because if you haven't specified any policies, then we're going to use all the old rules for opt-in or opt-out. If you've added policies, that's changing the behavior because you've actually added a policy that says, I want to do this. So to me, that's not a breaking change. That's a new feature.
Yeah, yes. So is that all right that when you're creating the new policy, we will not need to visit any of the existing options by default or opt-in, opt-out?
Yeah, I don't think the concern is mainly on breaking change. The concern is does that really make sense for the user? Because I give you an example. Opt-in, opt-out currently has extremely high flexibility. Like user can set, I want to opt out one specific volume under one pod by adding annotation. But I don't think currently the policy, the volume policy has such flexibility. By defining the
can you pick a volume by name or on the volume policies now? I can't remember.
But currently, it doesn't have this condition base. I don't think we do have that.
Yeah, if the volume policy cannot make that, it means we need to enhance the volume policy design.
We can enhance that, but that's also, we can enhance that, but we need to make sure we reach the same level of flexibility. I don't think,
so, but
I'm not very optimistic we can do that
we are not
in one round.
Deprecating the earlier approach, right? If the existing users are fine with the legacy approach, they can continue using that. If they are
we are not.
But then the validation approach is problematic because user may choose to use both. That's still a valid use case, and some user may want to do that.
Instead of the use case, it's a design decision, I would say.
Yeah, I think the problem comes in if we provide a new approach. I think we want to at least move towards having the same level of flexibility. Maybe not necessarily in 1.14, but for example, I mean, the flexibility, what you're saying is, can I pick any specific volume and annotate it? Well, obviously you can because you put an annotation on that volume. Do do we need to enhance volume policies to be able to essentially have that same flexibility? And I just off the top of my head, I can't remember whether we can do that or not, but it wouldn't be that difficult to say, I want a policy that says, you know, namespace equals name equals PVC. That'll match one PVC just like an annotation. You can do that. You would be able to do that if you could specify a volume policy that included namespace and name, for example. And if we can't do that now, that could be added as another feature. Maybe not, I would say not part of this because it's kind of a separate thing, because you're now tweaking the selection mechanism of volume policies, not the action part. But to the point, if we can't do that today, I guess it might be worth kind of figuring out how much more difficult, you know, if we look at the two options here. One option says, if you're using the new volume policies, we just ignore the default to FS backup and the annotations. The second approach that we talked about was, if you don't have a matching policy, then you apply the current logic. And in other words, it might be as, you know, conceptually, it's, you know, an if else block versus, you know, an if block followed by something that just gets run. I mean,
I just have a quick clarification question. So I think, let's say this is implemented, I'm a user and I decide not to use volume policies at all. My expectation is the current labeling opt-in, opt-out methods work exactly as they have, right?
Yes, with both of these options we're discussing, that remains true until we start removing features that are deprecated.
Right. And then secondly, I suppose as a user with new feature, I would probably test this out a little bit, create a simple volume policy, and experiment how it's working in my environment. Is that a reasonable expectation?
Sure. It sounds like, I think the one sticking point here that kind of points to one versus the other is, you know, is this a use case we need to support? The ability to say, I want to set a volume policy to use FS backup for whatever match rule I have.
Yeah.
But I also want to be able to identify other volumes individually by annotations to also use FS backup in the same backup. And if that is a use case we need to support, then we need the fallback approach of find a match, if no match, fall back. And again, it still seems like it's a question of how you do. I mean, so on one side you have, you know, find a match, if no match, fall back. The other approach, which Shubham is suggesting, is instead of find a match, it's, are there any rules at all, policies at all that apply to, you know, the new types? If so, find a match, and if you don't find a match, don't do anything.
Or
and if you don't,
the install
then you fall
default.
back. So you still have an if test, and something happens and a fallback. It's a question of when you go to the fallback. So I don't know that the fallback when we don't find a match necessarily complicates things, because we still have to have that fallback code path. The only difference is, do you fall back when there are no policies, or do you fall back when there are no matching policies? That's the difference, I think, between these, what we're talking about.
Right.
So when do you fall back?
So
Option A, fall back if there are no policies. Option B, fall back if there are no matching policies.
Yeah, the code blocks that I've added, it checks for matching policies.
Yep.
But I have added a note of mutually exclusive stuff. So that's where, like, we need to decide. I think the only deciding point is whether we want a validation or whether we want them to work.
I actually think the validation is problematic. I think the ignore the legacy stuff you could do. The validation, I think, becomes problematic because our only way of determining whether whether the user specified both legacy and new is based on that default FS backup Boolean, but the only way that works is if we change the behavior of that to leave it nil when they haven't specified it, but that's a breaking change. So I think we need to keep the handling of that flag the same, but now we lose our ability to validate easily, which leads us back to, instead of erroring out if they specify both, we just ignore the legacy stuff, which might be confusing.
Is it possible to grow this feature as non-supported tech preview until the point where the community has concluded that we have feature parity between old, legacy and new method? And then once we have, we say we support it. So you could use the volume policies as tech preview only. And that might go a few cycles. Once we're confident it can handle all the variations that the legacy method can, then we go into deprecation.
If you're talking about full support, I think that's one thing. I think I don't think we want the complexity of feature flag here, because I think that makes this code even more complicated.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, I think a better way to evolve is to make them coexist and fall back to the CR setting when there's no matching. In future, if we are confident, we can ignore the CR setting or deprecate the CR setting. I think that's a better approach, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that sounds.
Let's say, Daniel, you ignore the note regarding mutually exclusive thing and then review the design.
You say it again?
Let's ignore the note that added regarding the mutually exclusive stuff and then review the design. Does that work? Then does the existing design work if we remove the validation part?
I still don't, but I still don't quite follow you, Shubham. But let me say it again. Yeah, because Scott mentioned there are two options. There are fallback to backup CR if there's no matching, or if they ignore the backup CR when there is any policy, right? I would prefer the first approach. I think the backup setting, the setting in backup CR and the setting in the pod annotation should be respected, even there is a volume policy defined.
Well,
and the volume policy should have higher priority.
Yeah, I was going to say that they should be respected only if there's no if there's a matching volume policy. I think we all agree that if there's a volume policy that matches, that takes priority, and we ignore annotations for those volumes, because that's the whole point here, is to provide, because the policies themselves give us the priorities. Yeah, we're only talking about the fallback and whether what we do about whether we fall back and when we fall back.
Yeah, so in the given design, I have everything up. Let's just ignore the note regarding mutually exclusive validation and whatever you guys are saying then that exists in the design. I'm saying.
Why don't we just update the?
I'll
I would suggest, to avoid any confusion, we can add more specific example there in the design.
And there are no other conflicting.
Let's just update it, because I think I'm going to be filter this document in my mind based on what we agreed to the call. We're all going to have a different memory. It's not going to work. But if we update the design based on what you think we agreed to, then we all agree with you. We're good. And
is there a fallback? Anyway, I digress. Wow, good discussion.
Okay. By the way, I have added some memos for the conclusions and the focus of our open questions. Not sure if they are correct, but you can add more or correct them. Okay.
Thanks, Yungan.
Yeah. And we can continue the discussion offline. And thanks all for the discussion. And we still have one item that is from Wes. So Wes, please.
I'm so sorry. I'll go quickly. So Pradeep shared his thoughts on a long-term roadmap. I shared them with my team. They looked good. They're behind a Dropbox security. So I asked Pradeep if it was okay if we shared them via HackMD, and he said he just wanted to review that with you folks, and then We could put it out on HackMD so we can reference the long-term roadmap as we're doing some of these designs and candidate tagging, see if they align with one of those items. That's all I wanted to say. It's up there, it's empty, just waiting some time for Pradeep to give me the thumbs up. Sound okay?
Yep.
Yes, I think that's okay. I think we will discuss offline with Pradeep, so we can make some progress on this.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then eventually have it in at least in working form on HackMD, maybe some more permanent form on a wiki, on the GitHub wiki, but we don't need to do that now. We've been talking a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. That's all.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, thanks all for this long time meeting, and I think we can finish off the meeting here today, and we can continue this discussion for any of the open question or any further new questions since we have quite some time before the next meeting. And thank you for joining, and have a good day and good evening. Thanks. Bye bye.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.